The next two things, so arm health and arm strength. So who here has heard the term arm care? Okay, and so arm care in my mind is a little bit flawed because arm care in reality is really three things, and we only typically do one of them as part of our baseball routine. And the reason we only do one of them is because one's really easy to implement on a massive scale in terms of implementing it to a team or a group of people. But in actuality, there's actually three things that people should be looking at when we talk about arm care. Arm health is one of them. And so what we know with throwing is that as we throw a lot, we start to lose shoulder mobility, both overhead and rotationally. And that loss of motion is immediate. It happens at about 20 throws in a bullpen, according to the research. And it stays around, that mobility doesn't return in 24 hours, and it accumulates over the course of a season. And so that poor mobility then increases the stress to the tissue in our shoulder, tissues in our elbow, and then we start to have some of these injury patterns that we talk about. And so here we have a right-handed high school thrower. Okay, you can see, this is at the end of the season, you can see that his arm is not mobile. Okay, it doesn't raise the same way, it has a difference to it right side to left side. He's not in pain, okay, he has no pain. But to put him in an off-season lifting program or a velocity training program is going to put him in pain because he doesn't have any mobility. And so that's something that has to be restored before he gets into some of this off-season work. The other things that we lose is our rotational ability. So we lose our internal rotation, we call it, and so that's why we have things like sleeper stretches and stuff like that that we implement with people. But ultimately, without restoring this range of motion, this mobility, we start to put extra stress on our tissue, like the labrum, if you've heard of slap injuries, or our Tommy John type injuries to the elbow. That's where these come from, because ultimately, if you throw with a stiff shoulder, your body's going to find the path of least resistance. So your mechanics are going to be different as you start to throw, as well as we know that if you have a stiff joint, your body will never fully express its true strength. Meaning that if the body knows that if it tries to power through stiffness, that it potentially could hurt itself, so it doesn't do that. So your velocity is going to be down. So if we talk about improving performance, improving your arm health is going to be a big part of improving your performance because you have freedom of motion to do that. And so again, we don't necessarily gain these things by just time. We know that time and rest doesn't help them, so we need interventions. And so an intervention might look like something like this. We're in the clinic with our therapist, we're doing things to help the soft tissue restore itself back to the way it used to be. And so this is what I would consider the gold standard in terms of having somebody who knows what they're doing get in and address the tissue. Now, sometimes logistically that just doesn't always work, and so we do have options in terms of being able to have our athletes do a little bit of it themselves. And so this is an example of some of our baseball guys doing some foam rolling to that area. And so again, it's just something to help us in the ability to restore the soft tissue, but it has to be intentional. It has to be something that we put a focus on, but we don't necessarily know what to focus on if we don't evaluate it first. And so when we talk about arm health, in our opinion,